All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show, third hour of the program. Now, a recent study from McGill University reveals an unexpected finding. Highly educated individuals are less likely to age at home, despite having more resources. Let's dive in deeper into what was found here with Clara Bolster-Foucault, a PhD candidate in epidemiology and co-author of this study. And it's so lucky because Clara has joined us in studio this morning. Hi, Clara.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
So, I saw the headline and I saw the press covered this story and I see the headline and it got my attention right away, right? Because highly educated people, usually they've got all the resources in the world, but they're ending up not faring at the end of life in ways that maybe you'd expect. Why don't you tell us what you found?
Yeah, it's a very interesting and surprising finding. And I'll maybe preface this by saying that most of the research that went into this finding comes from the U.S. So I will say that there are differences across jurisdictions, but you're right. We tend to think of education as being associated with having more resources. This is both, financial, so maybe having the money to modify your home if you have changing functional needs, moving to a different home if you need, different levels of support. But that's not what we're finding in this study. And it reveals that education is complicated. Socioeconomic status in general is a very complicated thing. And there's a ton of reasons why this might be. Folks who have higher education tend to live longer. So they might need more care later in life. They might not be as able to stay home. They also have fewer kids, which tends to be later in life.
Okay, let's talk a bit about that, right? Because that's where, obviously I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I kind of get it. I know the people in and around me. The more education, when you add the masters and end up with the PhDs and the salaries rise and they're highly educated and they make this decision to have, even though they've got all the resources in the world, they probably have good salaries. They make the decision to have less kids, not more kids. Sometimes based on ideology, some for all types of reasons that people choose not to have kids. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, you see, you don't have those kids. Well, later in life, maybe you're going to regret that. I don't know. I mean, I'm going down a path here that maybe you don't want to go down, but you know what I mean? Like that's where my mind goes.
No, that could definitely be part of it. One thing that I'd bring up is also choice. Folks with more education tend to have more health literacy and they're more able to exercise their level of choice. And it could also be that folks who are more educated, their kids tend to also be more educated, and maybe rather than have their kids care for them when they're older, they're saying, no, I'm going to go into a nursing home. I am going to take charge of myself so that you don't have to care for me. So that's also part of these decision makings, and it's so complicated what goes into where people choose to live when they're older.
Well, that's a very good point, right? Because, that just could be culturally as well. Let's say, the culture is you don't have a lot of education, but you have large families. That will change the outcomes as well,
Absolutely.
Right? So that is interesting. Just on the thought of these highly educated people are living longer, right? So if you're living longer, that changes the paradigm of how that will end up.
Absolutely. You have more years, and you might have more years in a less healthy state. So you might need more support, and whether that's from unpaid caregiving from friends and families, or whether that's from the healthcare system like primary care, you do need more support as you age.
Do we have any idea on how this affects happiness at those later stages of life?
That's such a good question. It's not my area of research, so I don't know too much about it, but there's really a lot that's going on. The research around isolation in later years. I think there's such an interesting relationship between, for example, social structure and how happy we are as we age.
Well, is there a connection here with loneliness or being alone?
There could very well be. This isn't something we looked at in this study, but what we found, another finding that won't surprise anyone, is that social resources, so proximity of friends and family, of kids, are hugely associated with your capacity to age in place. And there might very well be a relationship between that and education.
Tell me, why were you looking at this?
That's a good question. The original inspiration was honestly what was going on in the pandemic. We were seeing folks in CHSLD in Quebec have really an experience that nobody wants. So this is something like being in nursing homes, being in long-term care facilities. Individuals don't want to be there. An overwhelming majority of older adults want to stay in their homes and communities. The policy people also want people to stay in their homes. It's expensive to provide long-term care. And so aging in place is both an individual preference and a policy priority. And yet we do see people going into long-term care when we don't want them. And in the context of the population getting older, Quebec being one of the fastest aging populations in Canada, this really is something we need to think about. How do we help people stay home? And we have universal healthcare in Canada, or we like to think that we do. And so we think that health is the only thing that's driving admissions to long-term care. But we know now that that's not the case. Social things are creating disparities in aging in place. And I think we really need to address those.
We're with Clara Bolster-Foucault, a PhD candidate in epidemiology, co-author of a recent study from McGill University that reveals an unexpected finding: highly educated individuals less likely to age at home. So what should we do with your findings?
That's a really good question. I think from an individual level, sort of being aware of the factors that can help you or hinder you to stay home. From a policy perspective, I think there's a really big opportunity for the system to step up and fill the gap for informal caregiving. For example, we have home care. Publicly funded home care is wildly underfunded, and so folks are having trouble accessing it. And I think identifying the people who might need more help is a really great opportunity to support equitable aging.
Staying at home seems like it's a goal, right? Like we want to keep people in their homes as long as possible. What do we know about the benefits of that, about why that's important?
Yeah, there are so many benefits. I mean, it's associated with happiness, with community, with, a sense of stability, a sense of agency. It really is stability. However, maybe what I'd say is that we tend to think of aging in place as like staying in one home, the family home that you've had for 30 years. And that's not necessarily the goal or the reality, right? What I would like to encourage folks to think of is aging in place is not one place. It's aging in the right place. And maybe that means moving. Maybe you are downsizing to a different home that has different capacity or to meet your functional needs. Maybe it's moving to a community where you have care around you, like in informal caregiving or primary health care. Or maybe moving into a supportive institution that makes sense. But that, I want to open folks' perception of what it means to age in place. Because really being in the place that has the support that you need at the right time is what we need.
Now, I know you referenced off the top that you looked a lot at U.S. studies for this, right? And you had U.S. data and some from other places as well. I wonder how much is there to the cultural aspects of this. Like, so, my parents, both Greek, they're both passed, and they both did not want to leave their home. They were in their home 50 years plus, and they're like, I've lived here, I'm not going anywhere. And, and for my mom, she had ALS, for crying out loud, but she didn't want to leave home. And my dad didn't want to leave home.
Of course.
Do we have any indications on the cultural aspects of this?
Absolutely. There's a really strong signal that we're seeing. We looked at, again, a lot of studies from a lot of countries that are socially and economically similar to Canada. And we see that, for example, race and ethnicity have a huge influence on whether or not people stay home. And this is, I'm making, broad sweeping generalizations because it's hard to disentangle all of this in an 8-minute radio show, but folks who come from racialized communities are much more likely to age in place. And there's a bunch of reasons this could be, right? Preferences, folks from different regions. There's different norms around where you live as you age and around caregiving for your family. So the expectation that folks will step up and care for you might be different across cultural groups. There may also be a lack of access to healthcare and a lack of access to long-term care. So I want to be specific in saying that, I'd like to think that it's good that they're staying home, but there is a subset of the community who are staying home because they don't have another option. And that's not ideal.
There is a difference between, hey, this is how we do it in our culture, and we have to do it.
Absolutely.
Necessity, right? Those things.
Yeah.
Interesting. Can you say what's better?
What's better is being in the place that you want to be and is safe for you. The problem is that's complicated to measure, right? Like individual preferences really do for me, act as the most important driver of where someone should live. If someone wants to live at home, but they can't do it safely, maybe that's something that we need to be considering in terms of long-term care.
What do you want to study next?
That's a great question. We're actually taking this to Quebec. So the next phase of this and the next phase of my thesis is using Quebec-based data to look at inequities in aging in place. So in our local context, we're looking at whether gender, education, racialization, and rurality influences whether or not people transition to CHSLD. So stay tuned for more local results.
I don't like to throw around this word, but I will give you this seal for this interview. Fascinating. You get the fascinating seal of approval.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in.
Of course.
Clara Bolster-Foucault is a PhD candidate in epidemiology over at McGill University and co-authored this study.